Some leaders leave footprints, others leave libraries. You're tuning into the Authors on Mission podcast, where industry giants become literacy legends. In every episode, we talk with authors who turn their brilliance into books that transform lives. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission. Welcome to your authorship experience. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Authors on Mission podcast. Today, we're going to be diving into the fascinating world of family business with Neil Raphel, a man who's worn many hats, from law to finance to publishing and education. He is the CEO of Brick Math, co-author of The Complete Idiot's Guide to Successful Family Business, and has over 3 decades of experience in publishing. It's not just writing family business, he's living it, working alongside his wife in their educational publishing ventures. And today we're going to talk all about the unique challenges and opportunities of family businesses and how writing books has helped, move along his journey. So without any further ado, Neil, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's going to be a great show, and I'm really excited to dive in. I mean, we have a lot in common because when I'm not doing podcasting and ghostwriting and editing, I also teach. So we're both kind of have a lot in common with the writing and the education part. So
Yeah,
it's going to
great.
be really fun.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I guess I would love to start off today, if you don't mind, talking a little bit about your journey from law and finance to publishing and education. Where did you start? How did you end up where you are now? Give our audience a little bit of background about you, perhaps, that I didn't quite yet address. What would you like to share with us?
Yeah, so I graduated as a liberal arts major from college. Went home to my family for a while. They were putting together a project in Atlantic City, New Jersey called Gordon's Alley. And they had like 30 merchants. They got a wine and cheese shop, and they recruited all these people to come, a flower shop, a leather shop. It was a lot of fun. And so I decided to have a bookstore there. And so I did that. It was my first sort of entrepreneurial gig. And it went okay for a while, but I had a partner and we didn't really get along. So I went to her and said, either you buy me out or I'll buy you out. And she wanted to continue. So I went to law school with nothing better to do. And I went to University of Texas. And after that, came back home and, met my wife. And we got married, and I met up one day with a guy who traded options and commodities. And he had hired my dad to do some marketing for him. And so I went up and said, I'd like to hear more about it. I'm thinking of doing something like that. And he said, well, why don't you open one in Atlantic City? Because, there's gamblers down there and they'd like to trade options and commodities. And I said, I'd rather be in New York City. And he said, okay. And my wife went to business school there. So it's just sort of happenstance that I got involved in these things. But it was a great career move because he was an entrepreneur. He taught me how to be an entrepreneur, and I really enjoyed that. So that's how I got from law to business. And then after a while, my wife had a baby. We decided to go back to the Atlantic City area where she was from, and I decided to join my dad in business. So I've always, for a long, long time, been involved in a family business. And he was a merchant. He had started this, like 30 stores, but he also did a lot of marketing, and he started speaking about marketing. And I said, Dad, when you go to speak about marketing, what do you sell the audience besides your speech? And he said, I don't have anything. He said, let's do some books. So that's how I got into books. And he knew a lot of speakers. And it was a great way to get into the book publishing industry because, books are very difficult to sell. But his friends all had speaking gigs. And at the end of the show, they could sell 50, 100 books to the audience. So we published books by other business authors. How I got into educational publishing is my sister-in-law was a teacher, and she knew this great teacher who had 500,000 followers on Facebook, and she was looking for a publisher. And so we started publishing with her, and then we got other educational authors. So it was sort of a gradual evolution. My wife didn't want to work with me while, our kids were growing up, but after we moved to Vermont from New Jersey, she said, okay, your parents aren't around, It'll just be the two of us and let's work together. And so we started that. And then the other evolution we made was from educational publishing into starting a company. It's called Brick Math. We sell a bunch of books with it, but we also sell the bricks. We never thought we would sell these bricks, but the first school we sold the books to said, where are the bricks to go with it? And Lego didn't have it. They're sort of like Lego bricks, Lego compatible. But Lego didn't have a set of bricks that we needed for this, so we had to make up one of our own, and that took a few years. We started out by just getting used Lego bricks and packaging them up, but eventually we sourced our own bricks in China, made little sets of them, and that's what we do today. So anyway, yeah, that's sort of my career.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I mean, you've definitely gone on a huge journey from, one avenue to the next. And, it's very important for our audience to understand that as we dive into sort of like, what led you to where you are now and what led you to creating the book. Because our audience today, like at the end of the day, they're interested in seeing how writing a book transformed what you've done. But also it's, what you've accomplished even before the book is incredible also. The whole Atlantic City thing, I'm also from New Jersey too, so that's kind of cool that, it's a very small world, by the way. But yeah, I mean, so I guess
one thing that may be helpful to your audience is that to be a successful book marketer, the author has to go out and help hustle and sell the books. And there's two types of people, I think, in the world. One are entrepreneurs that really like doing that. And there's other type of people who like working for a company and don't want to put themselves out there and market. And if they're not like that, they're going to have there's a lot of reasons to write a book. You can write it, to advance your business career or for family memories. But if you want to make money selling books, the author has to be an entrepreneur or come up with a great marketing team, such as, Authors on Mission, that can help them become entrepreneurial and sell the books. But we've had authors who said, well, I wrote the book. It's your obligation to market it. We said, well, if you don't want to market the book, it's not going to be successful. I don't know if you tell people the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between writing a book and having your name on it, but then putting it on the shelf and kind of, being done with it. Because, I mean, if you're letting it collect dust, then your readers might also be, right? You have to keep, going out there, spreading the word, getting your face out there, keeping people interested in what you have to say. One thing I always like to talk about is, while you're planning a book, you don't just making the outline for the content, but a lot of the times you make the outline for, content to be released to promote the book before and after publishing, because that's just how you create buzz about it and, get everybody to want to buy it and want to read into it. And I think that speaking gigs like you do is a huge factor in it.
Have you had to deal with unrealistic expectations? Because we found that everybody who wrote a book said, this book's going to sell millions of copies, and they just thought they're such geniuses that they'll put it out there and it'll work. But it's just a lot of work. It's like any other job if you want to be a successful marketer. And again, you could hire other people to do the marketing, but you still have to be involved and do podcasts and write blogs and spread the word out about what you're interested in, especially with nonfiction. Fiction may be a little different story.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, we work primarily with nonfiction as well. But I mean, it's funny. I had somebody I was talking to recently. We made the comparison how your book is like your baby. You can't just, bring life into the book and then expect it to grow up on its own, right? You need to
that's a great
keep
analogy.
nurturing it. So, that's a huge thing. So for all of our listeners right now, I mean, it just emphasizes the importance of it. You have a message, an idea that you spent so much time putting it in the chapters of your book. You have to love it. You have to keep, letting it thrive and speaking about it and just promoting your message. So it goes all into the planning of the very start. How are you going to?
It doesn't have to be dollar sales. You can use a book to promote your career. There's other reasons to write a book. And, doing it their way was not something I really loved. It's so much better to work for yourself and do it the way you want to. But they had to present everything with little anecdotes and, pull out things, and you had to, do it the way they wanted it. So that was tough. And I don't think it was as good a book as it could have been if we didn't have to follow such a rigid structure. But, they had their audience who were used to things being done a certain way. And I could understand how they didn't want authors to stray too far from that.
Right, yeah, it's a shame that you weren't able to adapt it, especially after you said they dropped out of it, so you kind of took it on your own project. It's a shame
Oh,
that you
no,
weren't
no,
able to kind
it
of.
was, they just have slots they want to fill. They wanted to find someone to write about family business. We had no involvement with them. We didn't know them. But the reason I mentioned it is because it was such a tight deadline. It wasn't like we had a year or two to write a book. We had
Understood.
3 months to do a new format that we had never done before and and come up with a whole new book. And we got it done. But the writing part was difficult because of those obstacles.
Yeah, I guess that's a struggle to think about because, sometimes you have to follow within the constraints of somebody else's expectations when writing, which, could be a little bit hard, in terms of creativity and, adapting to processes. But I guess that goes to show a lot because the book was, came out to be incredibly successful, even if, you think you maybe could have done it a little bit differently. So that just goes to show like just the, you know, um, impressiveness of being able to take somebody else's ideas and transform it into something even better, but while still, matching their expectations. I mean,
Yeah.
as companies like ours, that's what you have to do. You have to make sure the client's happy, and that's what, you always cater the plan to their, their goals, their desires, and you have to work from there. So, I
Yeah.
mean,
Do
clearly it was
you
successful.
typically
So,
do editing as well? Do you do?
yeah, I wear like all the hats. So I
Um,
do, I do angel writing. That's what we call it here, angel writing, rather than ghost writing. And editing, the blog posts, podcasts, all that. So,
have you
um,
written your own books?
I have not written my own book yet.
But you have one in mind, I'm sure.
I mean, it's hard to even narrow down different ideas because I feel like every time I talk to somebody these days, all these podcasts I do, I get inspired by everybody. And Neil, it's if I could sit down and just like spend a week writing my own book or something, that would be
Hmm.
amazing. But for now, I love just like gathering the stories and hearing it from everybody. I mean, what about you? Do you have any other ideas on your plate? Because you have, the Complete Idiot's Guide, but have you ever written a book for yourself too? Right back
Oh,
at you.
have we written? Yeah, we've written a bunch of books on marketing, loyalty marketing. We got into loyalty marketing. There was a time in the supermarket business where people did not have loyalty cards, where you get 20% off certain items. Most supermarkets have them now. And we work with a guy, Ryan Wolf, who wrote a book about how loyalty marketing works. And his theory was, supermarkets try to sell to everybody. They have a weekly ad and they used to send it to, all their customers. But he said, ignore that. Just find out, get some data, find out who the top 20% of your customers are. You make all your money from there. You lose money on the other 80% and just market to those people. So it was an interesting idea. And that's why they started the loyalty card, because you could measure how much people are spending and give the best deals to the best customers. So we worked with a guy, Lee's Supermarket in Massachusetts, and they had a loyalty program, and a really good one. And he said two customers came in one week, and both of them wanted sort of different kinds of ice cream that we didn't carry. So the first guy I looked up, I saw he spent like, $100 a year with us. I said, well, I'm sorry, we don't have room in our shelf for it. The next guy I looked up, spent $10,000 a year with us. I said, we're going to make room for the ice cream you want because you want it in our store. So really, you get information, you use that information to help out your best customers and really, give them advantages. And that's worked well for supermarkets that follow that.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And it's funny, I feel like we've had loyalty cards for so long now. I don't even know if in my own history I could remember a time when we didn't, but like when I was a child, I guess so, right?
Well, my dad did something very early that was interesting. He had a tie salesman who came in every year. He had a clothing store. The tie salesman came in to sell him. It was like Ralph Shoemaker or something. And then one year he came in and says, Mary, I have a line of clothing I'd like you to take a look at because I'm going to go out on my own. He said, sure. And he said, but by the way, I've changed my name, to promote this line of clothing. I'm now being called Ralph Lauren. So this is the guy, this was Ralph Lauren. My dad had a store in Atlantic City, New Jersey. He said, I'll tell you what, Mary, if you take my clothes, I'll give you an exclusive for South Jersey for Ralph Lauren merchandise. And my dad built up a whole store around Ralph Lauren. And he also found people that liked Ralph Lauren and started a Ralph Lauren club, advertised to those people, and really did really well with it. About 25 years later, Ralph came down and said, Murray, I just signed a nationwide deal with Macy's. You don't have an exclusive anymore. But for 25 years, he was the only merchant, the only place you could get Ralph Lauren merchandise in South Jersey. So, I mean, it's just luck of the draw, but he capitalized on it by starting a loyalty type club for his customers.
Well, first off, I'd like to say that I love the way you started that story by just like casually like weaving in there, like this is Ralph Lauren, by the way.
Well,
That's
that's
really
a lot of
funny.
times what we tell authors in nonfiction books. We had people write a book about, customer marketing, and they had a bunch of chapters, and it was sort of a boring book. I said, why don't you do this? Start every chapter with a story about a company that uses it, Apple Computer or, a clothing company, and then relate it to what's in the chapter. We wrote a couple for them to show them how to do it, but they were novices at writing, so we had a meeting with them every week. We read their chapters, and eventually it became a pretty good book. So stories really work in nonfiction. I guess you discovered that. You know,
Yeah,
life stories.
100%. It's something I always
People love
recommend.
reading them too.
Yeah, you always want to start off with a story, whether it's fictional or real, just to
Right.
get the reader, engaged and, kind of lay out the central problem that's going to be discussed in that chapter, kind of touch upon their pain points a little bit, and then, how it might be resolved. And I like to do that at the beginning of chapters and kind of like transition into the content. It's kind of like a little pattern I like to follow, at least, although every
Yeah.
book's different.
We had another interesting encounter with a publisher. We were doing our own books, and one of the books was called Tough Selling for Tough Times. And this bookstore owner in like Ohio bought a copy, and somebody from Harper Business was visiting him, because he was in town, and he said, what kind of books do you think we should publish? And the guy pulled out our book and said, you got to get these guys because they write a great book. So we got a phone call the next day from Harper Business, and they said, can you come to New York? Because everybody's talking about your books. One guy made the difference. And so we went to New York. They published a book called Up the Loyalty Ladder. And, it was a big success from our point of view. They published it in hardback, they ran out, they published it in paperback. And we kept that, because my dad was speaking, we kept saying, your author's discount is not that, great. Can you just sell us the books for 50% off, instead of 65 or whatever it was? Then we can make some money by selling them. They said, no, 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 because we wanted to buy them for like $10 or something. And so this went on for years. And then one day we get a notice and they said, the book's going to go on remainder. You can buy all the remaining copies for $2.63 after begging them to sell it to us for $10. And we bought 2,500 copies and we sold them all, because my dad was still speaking. And it was a good book. They did a great job on it. But, it was just, a good story, because what may not be valuable to them was certainly valuable to us. We really benefit from the book long after, it was out of bookstores.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, touching upon that, books, you never know the impact they're going to have, like years down the road. I've had clients say that, like, even if their book wasn't popular right off the bat, like, you never know, like, the way tides change as life goes on. But I would love to actually circle back a little bit because you mentioned your father a couple of times, and I know that, he must have been a very influential person in deciding and influencing you as you grew up because, as a merchant and a marketer as well, what kind of lessons did you learn from aside from what you might have already shared that you think really drove your path moving forward?
He was an amazing marketer, amazing journalism student, went to Syracuse for journalism, and he did plays in college. So he had a lively stage presence. And he started a little store with my aunt and uncle and mother, a really tiny little baby shop, and he expanded. But as he was running the baby shop, he started doing marketing things, direct marketing. He became an expert in direct mail. He wrote for Direct Marketing magazine. And one day, the publisher of Direct Marketing magazine said, we have a conference in New York. Would you like to speak at it? So he spoke at it, and he did a really nice job. And afterwards, someone came up and said, Murray, we'd love to have you at our conference. How much do you charge? He had no idea. So, he said $500 or something. And that's how he started his speaking career. Every time he did a speech, more and more people wanted to hire him. And then he had my mom take over the bookings because he would speak for zero, and she said she would double the price every year until it came to the point when he wasn't getting enough bookings because he really undercharged. And he turned out to be a great, great, great business speaker. And every year he gave a speech to the biggest conference in the supermarket industry, like 5 or 10,000 people in the audience. It took him 6 months to put the show together. And then he took the show on the road and went to state associations and gave the same show. And he traveled around the world, made friends around the world, just speaking on marketing. So I really admire him. We didn't see the book at all. We just started from scratch. And we got along in business, although here was our procedure. I would say, hey, Dad, let's do this. And he would say, oh, I don't know if we should do that. And I'd say, come on, I really want to do it. Well, I don't know if we should do it. And then we went to my mom and she made the decision. We both trusted her. And most of the time it was with me.
Oh, okay, you were the favorite.
Yeah. But it was fun working with them. I really enjoyed it. It was a blast.
Neil, your face just lights up talking about those stories and talking about him. That's like really heartwarming to hear. It really just goes to show like how much you value family businesses and, how
That's how we could
it
write
shaped
about
you.
it. My
Yeah.
wife worked for several really big corporations, but I never have. I worked for some small businesses, but I never really wanted to be just a cog in a machine. But I have a son who is very happy working for other people and that never wants to work for himself. And I have a daughter who's very entrepreneurial. And my wife is more of the corporate person, although she's done well, adjusted well to work with me. But, it's just you're either a corporate type or you're an entrepreneur. And authors who want to do a good job with their books have to be a little entrepreneurial, I think.
Yeah, I guess that just ties back to how like, you need to market your own books and get out there, all that, if you're
Yeah.
going to be an author. But, not to discourage anybody who might not see themselves as an entrepreneur, but there's always, resources where, you can reach out to authors or your companies as well.
Again, there's other reasons to do a book. It's
Yeah.
a great calling card. I mean, you show your expertise in a profession and people want you to work with them if you have a good subject and do a good job with the book.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, I kind of want to touch back on your wife a little bit because, you said that, obviously you work with her a lot, but she's more of kind of like in the corporate world. I'm wondering, like, is there a little bit of a balance between, what she does and what you do? And does that create any like interesting dynamics when it comes
She
with...
did human resources. She was the first MBA student to get a job at Goldman Sachs in human resources. So she has a good background in human resources. But what you said is so important. We have our separate areas of expertise. So she's a really great editor. She edited all our business books that we published. I mean, she reads the New York Times and says there's 20 typos on this. I mean, she just spots typos and she's incredible with editing nonfiction books. And so she does that. I'm more of the sort of, maybe idea person, sort of big picture ideas with the books, help a little with that, and also with the marketing. And so it's a good team and we don't step on each other's toes too much. She also does websites. We've done a bunch of websites for different authors and for organizations, and I don't do that at all. So each of us, has things we do. I'm more involved in the sales, and she's more involved in getting things done right. And I can't do what she does, and I don't think she wants to do what I do. She could do it, but she doesn't want to.
I mean, that's how the best team work, right? You
And the
complement
same
each
thing with
other.
my father. I mean, I could never, do what he did in terms of public speaking. We also ran some conferences on supermarket marketing, which were kind of interesting and fun. And I got up there and did a speech. I was horrible. And my dad was like, his ratings were 9 out of 10 and mine were like 6 out of 10. I could never do what he did, but I sort of am more, financially oriented than he is. So he has no interest in money. And I did. I wanted to make money with this stuff. And so you need both. And my mom helped out, with the money aspect too. So different people have different skills. And it's good if your skills mesh. And they do with my dad and they do with Janice.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, sometimes you need like, counteracting skill sets because if you guys are both in the same mindset and talent set, then, you need to kind of have other people, branching into those other
And you
areas. So
said,
that's
and
amazing.
we haven't talked that much about the book, but one of the things that, makes a family business work is that in an big organization, um, you're assigned roles, but in a family business, there's it's more fluid. So people do what they want to do and are good at, and they don't have to fit into the corporate structure as much because family businesses can be huge, but they're generally much smaller and mom and pop type things. And that's one of the benefits of a family organization. First of all, you know each other so well, and also you have more flexibility in running the business the way you want to, not one size fits all. And that was
Yeah,
my
yeah.
problem with the book we were talking about. It just was one size fits all. And I can understand the reason for that. It makes a lot of sense with a series. We do a series for our Brick Math program, and every book has to be organized the same way. So I get it, but that's not just the way I want to do a marketing book.
Yeah, no, I understand that. But yeah, drawing upon that book a little bit more, I read through it a bit and, kind of branching off what you said is that, family businesses can actually be more independent than non-family businesses. And I guess I see where you're going with that now that you said this because, you get more flexibility being that, you know each other so well and it's your family. Can you elaborate a little bit more about like, the advantages and potential pitfalls of having that sort of independence
Well,
with your family?
you mentioned one of the stories we let off the book with. It was actually a supermarket company,
Oh,
and the owner of the supermarket company had a son, and the son was taking advantage. He said, "My dad's the boss." He acted like a big deal, and he went on an unauthorized vacation when they really needed him at the store. And so when he got back from vacation, his father called him in. He said, "Tom," he said, you're really not doing well here. Um, and I think it's time for you to go. So you're fired, Tom. And, goodbye. And so he went out and he was crying. He was in the, changing room of the store and he was really, really upset. And then he gets a phone call on his cell phone. And it's his dad. He said, "Tom, I understand you've been fired today." I said, "It's Dad." I said, "I'm really concerned about you. Anything I can do to help out." So, in a family business, there's these overlapping roles. There's the boss and the employee, but there's also the dad and the son. And it makes it a little more difficult sometimes to run a business that way. And a lot of successful family businesses have a rule, the bigger ones, says if you want to work in our family business, that's great. You got to work 3 to 5 years for somebody else. And then you know what it's like to work in a real business and you just can't be, the boss on day one. And I think that's a really good thing, especially for a larger family business, to make sure the cousins, after a while, the family expands and there's a lot of people who want to work for the company, but, they have to get the independent experience before they can do really well with a company. I think it really helps.
Yeah, well, that's actually the story that you started the book with, if I'm remembering correctly, the
Yeah.
interest grabber, like we were talking about, that story that brings everybody in. And it definitely is a funny one because, when I was going through it too, you don't expect the dad to kind of like switch hats like that so fast. But, it makes sense. Like you have to have that separation. And I like the idea of like making the family member try another business before jumping right into the
Yeah.
other one. It's almost like, if you're living your whole life, looking at the family business, you don't even know the other perspective, right? So that benefits the company too, because if they do come
I mean,
back,
I
might
think
offer new
that's like a
ideas.
90% rule, though. 90% of the time, you want that to happen, and certainly in a big family business. But sometimes, the person is perfect for the job. They really want to do it. Why not give them a chance? And if it's not working out, then you can send them away for a while. But I'd say by and large, it is a good idea to have the experience of working for somebody else.
Yeah, yeah, and like I said, it benefits you just like your own, do you really want this? Is there something else out there that maybe you want more? But also like, I mentioned actually like it gives you more insights that you can bring back and offer to the family business if you do decide to come back to it, right? So there's kind of both benefits of that.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, we talking a little bit more about the book now too. Um, let's see. The one thing that you did mention in there too was, there's a difference between having, a long-term business goal versus quarterly profits. This is sort of just, another topic that you mentioned in the book that I figure, it's kind of important to touch upon. Um, how is this different for family businesses, and how do you kind of maintain that long-term view, being that it's your family members that you're talking about?
Well,
That's
I don't
something you
think you
discussed in the book a
can
bit.
with a family business as much as you can with like Amazon. Take Amazon, for example, one of the biggest businesses in the world, if not the biggest. They lost millions and millions of dollars, every year, tens of millions, hundreds of millions. They kept losing because they were building up this infrastructure, and they had investors that understood what they were doing. And Jeff Bezos obviously is a business genius, but they gave him a lot of leeway. But with a family business, a lot of times, especially a small business, you can't lose millions of dollars. You can't even lose thousands of dollars a lot of time. So there's less leeway. You have to focus on you're not reporting to shareholders your quarterly profit, but you got to be profitable every month or you're going to run out of money soon. So it's a different mindset. It's nice to have a longer term vision, but unless you have financial investors, you're not going to be able to do it in a small family business. You're going to have to make money every month, regardless of whether you have shareholders or not.
Yeah, I can see how, it's just like any other business, right? You say you can't really thrive if it's not making that money. So, yeah,
But just
and
another example, we've started a number of businesses. I said that conference business, this brick math thing, and I never wanted to start a business and get in the hole for tons and tons of money. I always wanted to be profitable month one. It's tough to do, and you end up being a lot smaller than you possibly could be, but it's a good way to think about business. This lady, Stu Leonard's, was a great supermarket operator in Connecticut, and this lady came in one day and said, "Stu, I make the best chocolate cookies around. Can you invest like $20,000? We'll get a factory, we'll do this, can you taste my..." He said, "No, this is what I want you to do. Go in the garage, make a couple batches, sell those, make a few more batches, sell those. Gradually we'll buy the factory. We'll get you in that, but you have to start out slow. You have to make money as you go along. You just can't, go from zero to, you want to have, me invest $100,000 in your little cookie factory. You have to show me that the cookies sell
yeah.
first. So starting small and making money is, a good thing for a family business to do.
Yeah, yeah, I see that. And, it's really clear that, all of this knowledge that you have about this family business topic and, everything you're putting into the book, it's really just based on things that you've learned from your father, from your wife, from your own experiences. So I think that's just another thing that, adds more, realism and value into your book because you're speaking from the heart. And I think that, for any writer who's looking for a topic, you got to write what you know. I mean, it's a pretty standard cliche thing to say, but I mean, it's really works because you have that passion for it, the knowledge for it, and I can see that when you talk about it, Neil. So it's very important that you had that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I guess I'm also wondering, in the process of writing this, you mentioned the challenge for it mainly was that, you had to follow a set structure for it. But I wonder, were there any other parts of the book that maybe were easier to write or something that, you think came out better than you had expected when you first dove into it?
Well, I think it was fine. I mean, there's a lot of examples in the book, and I think that's, what people want to see. There's also, it's interesting how, family businesses usually are in three cycles. The entrepreneur who starts the business, then, the next generation that builds up the business, and then the third generation that loses all the money that the business made, and it's like from boom to bust is sort of the typical thing. And it is that, that is really true, that sustaining is just, it's really hard. I mean, you go into any town and you go down Main Street and you see the rapid turnover of stores, keeping a business afloat, and especially through many generations, is just extraordinary tough work. And, family business is not easy. You can get personality clashes. There's all sorts of things that can go wrong. And plus, like my son, he's not, he'll take an income home whether the organization he's working for is making money or not. But when it's a family business, the and it's not doing well, then it can bleed over into your home. Like in our business, we had a parking lot for our customers in the clothing store. When my dad was running a clothing store, I was running a bookstore, and a casino in Atlantic City was developed right down the street from where our parking lot was. And you think that would be great. Well, it was an enormous hurdle. So because all the casino people wanted the visitors, there weren't a lot of parking around, they wanted to park in our lot. But we wanted to have the customers park in our lot. So we charged the casino people money, and the customers we gave a pass to that if they got stamped in the store, they didn't have to pay any money. But every night at dinner time, we'd have like hour-long discussions about the parking lot, you know? And so, it's tough to get away from your business if you're in a family business. And, it's really, that is one negative of working in a family business, is that it's all consuming.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you've touched upon a lot of like beneficial aspects of working with the family
Oh
members,
yeah.
like I mentioned, but there is that negative part, which actually is probably one of the most like, flashing ones, right? That you can't get away from the business because if that's what you have in common, that's what you're going to talk about, and that's what's, in the forefront of your mind. And I guess I'm kind of curious, like, of course, the parking lot's a huge factor. Were there like opposing viewpoints? Like, does somebody think you shouldn't be charging these people? Because I think
Well,
it's
we
pretty.
all we all wanted to get a little extra income out of it, but at the same time, we didn't want to disappoint our customers. So we really leaned heavily on not letting a lot of people park there for the day, although we would have been much, financially better off if we just were a parking lot for the casinos. But you can't do that if you have a business. Your customers have to be number one. And every really great business person I've known, has followed that advice, treat your customers well. You know, Stu Leonard had this huge statue built in front of his store, and it said, rule number one, the customer is always right. Rule number two, if the customer is wrong, reread rule number one. Always take the side of your customer. He realized it very early on. Someone came to his store when he was first opening up this supermarket, and they came in and they said, I bought this milk from you yesterday, and it's sour. It doesn't taste right. It smells. And so he said, oh, I'm very concerned about that. Let me see it. And so he smelled it and he tasted it. He said, I think it's okay. Let me go to my milk manager. So he brought the carton of milk to the milk manager. Milk manager tasted it. He says, there's nothing wrong with this milk. It doesn't smell bad. It tastes great. And the customer looked at him and says, I don't care. It's no good. I'm never going to shop in your store again. And Stu Leonard, that's why I built the statue. He said, I realized what I had done wrong. I was trying to prove a point that I was right and he was wrong. And I ended up losing the customer. Why not just say, oh, I'm sorry, the milk was bad. I'm going to give you your money back and give you a coupon for the store. That's what I should have done, not argue with the customer to try to prove him wrong. So the customer is always right. And merchants that follow that, do well. And if
Yeah,
someone
yeah. I
calls
mean,
us and says, I don't like your bricks, very few do, but I don't like your program. Oh, can I send you money back? I'll refund your money, keep it's just easier to be nice to someone. And in the long run, it doesn't cost that much money. I mean, if 0.1% of the people react that way, just try to make them happy. I mean, some customers say, we have one today that said, it shows on the postal thing that the product was delivered, but we never got it. And then I wrote back and said, we'll help you out. Can you just check with the postman and live in a place that has a doorman? Can you check with the doorman who was on that day? And, just see if you can find it. Because sometimes it shows up like a week late, somebody put it aside or something. So they wrote back and said, no, we checked, we don't have it. I said, okay, I'll send you one out, and if the other one comes in, just keep it, just to be nice, it's not costing me that much, and I'll get a lot of goodwill out of it. So it's worth the trouble. Don't tell anybody we do that.
And that's the tip now, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, I get what you're saying. At the end of the day, it's about, you know, well, in this context, the sale, the customer, building a reputation and not getting the review that's going to say these people didn't send me a replacement or that this representative was nasty to me or something like that, right? But then you can go home and again talk to your family members and be like, oh, that customer today, she totally had the package the whole time. Like, like that's another benefit of having business too. Like you can kind of hash it out later on.
Well, I
Um,
don't know if it's a benefit or a detriment. Growing
yeah.
up, every night at dinner time, my dad would say, this is when they were real small. Oh, Mary Evans came in the store today and she bought, a snowsuit and she bought some, pants and shoes. And my aunt said, well, did you try to sell her a shirt? And they would have these discussions on every single customer and like, enough already, And then it became the parking lot. So, it's just, you can't
Yeah,
get away
yeah.
from it. That's the downside.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And, kind of to tie that back into, the writing world, our audience is probably thinking like, okay, like interesting, like, the customers are always right and we can't go against them. But in a way, that's also how you should think of your audience when you're writing a book or your speakers, the audience of your speaker engagements, right? Because you don't necessarily, want your audience to be always right, but you need to tailor your book and your content and your speaking gigs in ways that would please them and give them what they're looking for. So I know I'm just kind of like relating it back to that kind of thing where,
Yeah,
you
you don't want
know,
to pander, but you want to listen. I mean, I think
yeah,
listening
yeah,
is a
their
really good
feedback.
attribute.
It helps you make it
You get
better.
feedback. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Just like a little thing I was thinking of there. It's always good
Yeah,
to
you're right.
fill that
Yeah, you're absolutely
in.
right.
But yeah, so, one question I always like to ask on this show is, do you happen to have a copy of your book with you right now that you might want to show us the cover or
Oh,
any of
yeah,
them?
sure.
Oh, you do?
Here,
Awesome.
here it is.
Oh, there we go. Oh, hold it up just a little bit higher so we can see. All right, cool. So we got like some orange. Is that your family right there on the cover?
No, it's two women who have like one of the longest, are sort of like third or fourth generation of a really old family business that's been around for a while. And, I didn't see the cover until the book came out.
Oh,
I don't know if your authors, but you work with them on the cover. When you get like a big publishing house, like in a book that we wrote up the loyalty ladder, we never saw the book we never saw the cover at all. We loved the cover, but if it was horrible, we had no say in it. So I think that's one
Mhm.
thing you probably work with your authors on is developing a cover that really works.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, all of our clients who come in, they actually have like, the final say in whatever goes on in the design work of their
Yeah.
covers, the back cover. And we verify with you like multiple times, like to make sure that it's exactly what you're looking for. It's a shame that, you don't quite have a step in it. I mean, in my role, I don't always see it until it's the final product too, but that's just because we have a team of people who like once I finish my editing job, somebody else might take over the cover. But, we're all in synchronicity about that. So that's a shame
But
that, yeah, but
I can understand why the big companies do it that way because we had an author who we love. We just love this person. She is wonderful. And we did a cover for her. And she said, can you change this and this and this? So we did another cover for her. And she said, can you change this and this? And we did another cover for her. And she said, can you change this and this? And we did another cover. And she
you
went
do
and
need a
said,
limit,
yeah, she
yeah.
said, can you change? I said, no, we can't do it anymore. If you want to
Yeah,
come up
yeah.
with another cover, give it to me. But this is done. Okay. And she
Hmm.
stopped. She was just such a perfectionist and wanted it, just really minor things. And after a while, it just got to be too much. But we always would show the authors the covers and, most of the time oh yeah, great.
Yeah, well, relating into that perfectionist aspect, I mean, everybody wants their book to be
Oh,
amazing,
absolutely.
exactly what they're looking
Yeah,
for. So,
yeah.
yeah, that's when, especially when I'm editing, I always like when I hand a piece back to somebody, I say like, provide me with a full list of anything you might want changed. We can hop on a call if you want, like, make it as detailed as possible and like really checking in with everything
That's
they're looking for
good.
before going back and making
Because
that
it's their
next
baby, you're
round.
right. As you said
Yeah, you want
before,
to,
it's their baby. It's so important to them. It's
yeah.
one of the biggest things in their life. They've been thinking about it for 10 years, and now they're doing it, and they really are concerned. And you want to get them invested in making it the best possible thing it can be.
Yeah, definitely. And just the more you're able to communicate with them and to really get on their level and see their vision, you're saving work for them, time for them, their book gets out faster, and also it saves you time too. So,
Mm.
but yeah, as we start to kind of come to, the wrapping up of our show, I'm curious to know if you have any last pieces of advice about, marketing or family businesses or writing in general that our audience might want to hold on to with them today.
Well, I think, it's not a bad idea to show people your work as you go along. So my daughter is a writer, and she's written a nonfiction book on crossword puzzles that really did well. She is a member of a lot of fiction share groups. She went to Iowa for her, MFA, and she met people there, and they talk about their books every week or every few weeks on a Zoom call. And she really shows them chapters of her book, and the feedback is wonderful. So, one thing that I don't know if you advise people to do, but joining a writing group can be really, really helpful in the process of writing your book and getting feedback.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think, even if it's like a Facebook group or even just
Oh,
like your
yeah.
colleagues at work, like pass it around at lunch or, I'm at authors, we do offer like, many different people look at your book and read it to get lots of different
Yeah,
opinions. So it's,
you
it's
have
very
to have some
important. Beta
rules,
readers.
it's
Yeah.
got to be all positive feedback, or, the thing they do is this works really well. This, I think needs some editing or something, but I like the idea. They always try to frame it in a positive manner, but really they're telling them, hey, you need to work on this, or this is really good. And that really helps, but you don't want to be negative to people in that sort of situation. You want to really be positive and help them out.
Yeah, yeah. And you kind of, I always like to, as an educator also, which we didn't quite touch upon too much of the education part, so we have to circle back to that on our next podcast together.
Okay.
But, you like to, whenever you're giving criticism, you Oreo cookie it is like how I say to my students,
Right.
positive criticism,
You,
positive.
you're,
So,
you're right. You start
yeah.
off with something good, and there's always something good, or usually. I mean, the idea is
Yeah.
good, the example is good, but there's always something you can praise. And then you can say, I think we should work on this a little more. I don't like the transition, whatever it is, then you can be a little bit critical.
Yeah, definitely. Until you get to the point where you don't have any criticism, and you're like, well, praise, praise, praise. But yeah, I just realized we never quite touched upon brick math. So maybe we'll have to have you back on the show a bit and talk about how, writing a book for education field is a lot more different than writing for the business field. I think that might be
Oh,
interesting.
yeah. Education market is really interesting. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it would be fun to do again. I
It would
really
be interesting, like
appreciate
from the
it.
side of like a teacher's perspective versus like the curriculum designer's
It's been
perspective.
really interesting experience. The educational industry is really tough nut to crack. People have lost a lot of money, and you know, the principals and superintendents and teachers get inundated with stuff, and they don't want to deal with it. So to make a dent requires, a lot of hard work.
Yeah, well, we'd like to have you more on. We could chat a little bit about that. And if you're interested, I'd love to schedule a time.
Sure,
Hopefully we
we can
can.
do
Yeah.
it. We have a really developed website called brickmath.com, just one word. And you or your readers should go there if you're interested at all in teaching math using these little bricks. It's really a hands-on type of thing that's worked out real well.
Yeah, I know children learn best when they have manipulatives
Oh
for sure,
yeah,
especially those tactile learners. So
yeah.
being able to,
And
count it
and
physically
there's
and
not
that
much
one-to-one
else that is,
correspondence and all
yeah,
that.
nobody else does this, so it's pretty interesting, and we have a lot of testimonials and stuff. Anyway, it's been a fun project to do.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely take a look at it. You know what? One more question, actually. You've got brick math, you've got all this. What's next on the horizon for you? Or do you have anything else coming up that perhaps our listeners might be
Okay,
interested to check out?
well, so I worked for a commodities firm for a while, but way back when. So I decided a month ago I needed a hobby. So I started trading stock options, and I got myself embroiled in this position that I shouldn't have done. And so I just did it a month ago, and it's been a lot of fun and just something new to do. So that's been fun for me personally.
Okay,
But
awesome. Well, honestly, thank you so much for coming on to the show today. It's been a real pleasure. You're really fun to talk to,
oh,
and you've
thank
done
you.
so much that I think our listeners can be inspired by today. Because I know I am, and I'm definitely going to check out your website for Brick Math because that's really fun. Something I could bring into multiple aspects of my own life, being the writing and the the teaching side. Very cool. And I'll have to check that podcast out pretty soon. And other than that, to all of our listeners today, this has kind of brought us to the end of our conversation with Neil and, his insights on family business dynamics, the evolution of his own career from Wall Street to educational publishing. I mean, his story shows us that success comes from understanding both professional and personal elements at play. To all of our listeners, whether they're also part of family business or just interested in the unique dynamics of it, and check out his book along with all the other books he's got out there. Brick Math as well, to all of our parents and educators listening. And if you're also inspired to write your own book and want to learn about more marketing it, like we talked about at the beginning of this episode, anything you might need, Authors on Mission is your place to go. And other than that, thanks again for joining us. Thanks for listening to our listeners, and keep writing, keep leading, keep inspiring. Have a good night, everybody.
This is Danielle Hutchinson reminding you that somewhere, someone needs the book that only you can write. Visit authorsonmission.com to start your legacy. Until next time, keep leading, keep inspiring, and keep thinking in chapters. Have a great day.